The Apartment Gurus podcast is brought to you by Greenlight Equity Group, an apartment acquisitions and holdings firm co-founded by Carl York and Tate Siemer, host of this show. We offer you the opportunity to be an owner of cash-flowing, wealth-growing apartments without the headaches of being a landlord. These assets are recession-resistant, risk-mitigated, offer significant tax advantages, and are a great alternative to the stock market. Ready to check it out? Go to www.investwithgreenlight.com today to book a personal consultation with Carl or Tate. Again, that's investwithgreenlight.com. We look forward to meeting you. Welcome to The Apartment Gurus, where twice a week, host Tate Siemer brings you deep dive interviews with the wisest gurus in the apartment investing industry. These experts are sure to create game-changing value and inspiration designed to catapult your business to the next level. Be sure to reach out to Tate at www.investwithgreenlight.com for access to his investor portal and Calendly link. And now, here is Tate Siemer and the Apartment Gurus.
Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Apartment Gurus podcast. This is exciting today. This is something that, we talk so much about, get to just about every aspect of this business, right? One of the things that we haven't gotten into a whole lot recently is seller financing, right? Creative financing, whatever you want to call it. And it's a tool that we just use to purchase our lot and 52 unit value add deal where we're basically doing a huge remodel on this entire community, 52 units. It's all vacant, and we're bringing in 3 construction crews and just hammering out this property. And we had to use a seller finance note to get the deal done. And it was a situation where we were in this contract with the seller, and we were having a really hard time getting the lender on board because it was such a small deal, quite frankly, in the multifamily space. It was a $1.4 million acquisition. And so we had to basically get the loan to value down, and the seller provided a big seller finance note in relation to the purchase price. So we just like I said, we just closed on that deal a couple weeks ago. And I haven't had a chance to really talk about it a whole lot on the show. So that's kind of news, I guess, for you guys. And we're rolling and off, and we have our construction crews on site already, and we're heading there next week to check it out. So, but I've got a seller finance expert on the show, of course, a guru, right? Just to live right up to the name of the show. I got Mr. Jeff Stevens on the show with me today, and Jeff is a fellow real estate investor, just like you, likely listener, and has mastered the art of the conversation with sellers, owners of buildings, of communities, of properties. In his world, single family and some small multifamily as well. And he has a really unique advanced seller financing strategy called Supercharged seller financing that I can't wait for you guys to hear about. But so Mr. Jeff Stevens is on the show. Jeff, super stoked to have you, man. Thanks for being on the show with me.
Equally stoked to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, appreciate that. So a couple things to mention right off the bat. Let's just go ahead and talk about rack up the rentals, right?
Racking up rentals.
Racking up rentals podcast. Guys need to go check that out. And tell us a little bit about that, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you so much. I do what I call thoughtful real estate entrepreneurship. That's the sort of title I've put on things. And in the Racking Up Rentals show, we talk about all different aspects of thoughtful real estate entrepreneurship. I always felt like when somebody would use the word thoughtful to describe me, I always felt like that was like the greatest compliment possible. And so as I set out to do this, I thought, gosh, what would it mean to be a thoughtful real estate entrepreneur as it applies to, building a rental portfolio? And I realized to me it was kind of 2 things, both of which I'm pretty sure we're going to get into today. One is taking a very people-oriented approach to doing business, especially in the acquisition process. A very human, person to person, belly to belly, ask good questions, actually listen, truly understand the other person, sort of an approach. But then the other aspect of thoughtful is just thinking independently, not necessarily subscribing to all of the same things that everybody else in maybe the mainstream part of the real estate investing community believes in, and just thinking a little bit more openly. So between those two things, we call it thoughtful real estate entrepreneur. And the Racking Up Rentals show talks about a lot of different aspects of that, from the philosophical right down to the very tactical.
Awesome. And you said you've got 300 or so episodes?
Just about 200. Yeah. We're just about to have our 200th here in the next couple of weeks.
Welcome to the club, man. I just clicked episode 200 earlier in the year. So
congratulations. Yeah.
It's not too many podcasts make it this far, Jeff. So
I am getting that impression. Absolutely. Yeah. You too.
Yeah.
Stuck with it.
Well, I love this idea of, well, first of all, just you being a thoughtful guy, and I love that resonates with you, and it kind of makes you feel good that when people say that about you, that's like a high compliment. And I get that. I get why that would be. I think that this industry does attract a lot of, go-givers, so to speak. And when you're a go-giver, you are thinking about other people. That's just what your orientation is. And you're constantly considering, how is what I'm saying affecting this person that I'm saying it to, or how is what I'm writing on social media affecting the general audience or the reader, the viewer? Talk a little bit more about, well, and I guess this is a good opportunity too, to kind of hear a little bit of your story, and in particular your real estate story, and kind of, how you got to where you are today doing what you're doing. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that with this whole theme of like this thoughtfulness theme that you've kind of built your business around.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I guess my real estate journey started right about 20 years ago, when my wife and I bought our primary residence that we still have today as a rental. It wasn't the intention at the time, but shortly after we bought that house, actually within a couple of months, I left my job and I became self-employed. And so I've actually been self-employed for the last 20 years. And in hindsight, I see how fortunate it was that I bought the house before I became self-employed, but that I can't say it was all that calculated at the time. But yeah, I just started reading and got excited about the idea of real estate. And we bought a triplex, was our first investment property. And that was a very conventional deal, listed property on the MLS, another Fannie Freddie conventional type of loan.
What market are these in?
Yeah, I'm in the Portland, Oregon market.
Yeah. So for listeners that aren't watching this on YouTube, Jeff has a beautiful display of soccer scarves behind him. And for those of you soccer fans out there, you'll know that the scarf is a fan's armor, so to speak. Almost everybody at the game's wearing a scarf and holding a scarf in the air when they score goals and that sort of thing. And Jeff's definitely got brownie points with me being a big soccer fan. I as many of you listeners know, I'm a huge soccer fan, and a big Real Salt Lake MLS soccer fan. And Jeff's team's the Portland Timbers, so we've got a good little rivalry, Western Conference rivalry here. But
we do.
So okay, so that's super cool. So you still have that the first place you bought. You still have that?
The house. Yeah, I did. I sold the triplex a while after. We still have the house, and so yeah, I kind of experienced this funny thing as I learned more about real estate and I got more and more excited about it. I started going to what I would affectionately call some cheesy real estate conferences and seminars, and the run to the back of the room types of pitch fest sort of things, and I started to get exposed to all sorts of new ideas. And I went home and I started, I'm a high action kind of guy. I started applying what I was learning. And so now I'm kind of dabbling in this cash offers, motivated sellers, this kind of a thing, wholesaling. And what happened was I started doing that. And I just would look at myself and say, I don't think this is me. This doesn't feel right. This kind of makes sense to my head why someone could make money or make progress doing this. But in my heart, I felt like, gosh, this is not me. I remember, ordering some bandit signs with a cheesy website on them and putting them up like in the middle of the night because I was embarrassed for anybody to see me. And I thought, if I'm embarrassed, this is probably not a great thing. So then I steer back kind of towards a more conventional direction. And looking again at listed properties and how does one get, qualified for lots of bank loans. And I started doing things like that. And I thought, okay, this feels better to me. But in my head, I'm thinking this is going to be a very, very, very slow path.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I kind of bounced off these two polar different ends where one felt really sleazy and I could see it worked, but it felt awful. And then the other one I could say, feels better, but doesn't seem like it's going to work all that well. And so I felt like I'd kind of hit a wall at that point because I thought, gosh, there's got to be something else. Mm-hmm. And it was after, a couple of years of, stumbling around that I eventually found sort of the process that I use now, which is very much about not targeting motivated sellers or of multifamily or single family or anything, but just getting in front of real people who own properties, having a nice, sincere, no pressure conversation with people, not something where I'm approaching them because I think that there's blood in the water for any reason whatsoever. Having a very empathetic type of conversation. I want to come back to that in just a second, that word. I think it's important. And navigating towards a solution that's a win-win. The word win-win is so cliche, but I think it's so apt in this situation too. And I started to realize that when I was working in a situation where there were intermediaries between me and the seller, otherwise known as real estate agents, brokers, that it was much harder for me to ever truly understand what the other party was trying to accomplish. And thus my talents, which I was starting to see emerge in listening and understanding the other person and then coming up with something that would work for them, were really kind of nullified by the fact that there are people in between us. And so I've gone more and more and more and more focused. And now I'm a big advocate and whatnot for the idea of developing the skills to get in front of sellers, have a meaningful, sincere, real conversation with them, and work towards a deal that's great for everybody and very often involves seller financing. And there's a lot of kind of art and science to that. And I'm excited to chat with you about the ideas behind like some of the seller financing things that we do. But just to touch on that word empathy for a second, I feel like that's a huge part of this idea of thoughtfulness. And a lot of people, I think, have a little bit of a allergic reaction when they hear empathy, because it sort of sounds like, hey man, this is a business. This is not a charity. I'm not going to be giving away the farm here, giving more than my piece of the pie to somebody else. I don't think that's what it's about whatsoever. I think empathy in this case is simply taking the time to ask the questions that allow us to understand the other person's perspective, because that's how we can best propose something that they will say yes to that will also work for us. So to me, empathy is not just a thing you do because it feels better, which it absolutely does. There's more of an ethical side to it, but it's also strategically is really valuable too, because once you understand your audience really, really well, you've got a much higher chance of crafting something that everybody's going to say yes to.
Yeah. Yeah. Chris Voss, is he a big influence for you, or what are your thoughts on his kind of some of his stuff? Cause he's big on empathy. But he's also goal oriented, right? He's trying to diffuse hostage situations and whatnot. So what are your thoughts on his stuff?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a big influence on me. The bits of his book and the podcast interviews I've heard that he's been a part of, a lot of it has resonated with me, and I like the fact that it reframes for a lot of people, I think, what negotiation even is, right? I think most of us kind of come to the table with, predetermined thoughts that negotiation is this sort of hardball, hard line, very direct, overt. Well, here's what I want and here's what you want. And what I've come to believe, because my biggest influence on negotiation is my own coach, Greg Pinio. It's not necessarily an author like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of even his influences came from some of the ancient like the Greek and Roman, like philosophers and, Aristotle and Cicero and people like way back in the day, and some of the fundamental ideas of philosophy. But one of the things that I love to think about is that, to me, the perfect negotiation is one where I get what I want. The seller gets what they want, but the seller never knew what it was I wanted in the first place. If you stop and think that through again, and say it again, it's like, oh, wow, that's actually quite interesting, right? Because I did the work to find out exactly what the seller wanted. And I'm navigating this conversation, and we're having this very relational dialogue where I've got them doing 90% of the talking, and I know exactly what they want. Quietly, I know what I want. And then I propose something that works for both of us, but the seller never knew really what I wanted in the first place. And I think that that's the really cool art of this, is when you can extricate those insights from the seller to give them something they will say yes to without making your own agenda clear really at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So where do you find your leads, and, talk to me about your marketing a little bit and how that all works for you?
Absolutely. The marketing is a huge part, not just for the cultivation of leads or just for like gathering leads, but there's a lot of pre-framing that happens with the marketing itself. And I like to say that the way that we reach out to people and connect with them sets the stage for the kind of conversation we're going to have, right? Yeah. You could just imagine if somebody goes out and just starts door knocking, somebody else is cold calling, somebody else has bandit signs, somebody else is just getting personal referrals from a close friend, someone else is sending letters. All of those leads are not going to be the same. And it's not to say that some are bad or some are good, but the dynamic that's created through the marketing channel itself informs and it sets the table for how the rest of the conversation is going to go, right? Obviously, the dynamic that's created by cold calling somebody is usually one where they're kind of caught off guard, and that's a very different thing than if they voluntarily contact you, et cetera, or a personal referral, things like that. So anyway, all of that is to say, I know what I'm trying to do is I'm working backwards from the objective of having a seller feel safe giving me a call back. So much real estate kind of marketing in general sort of has this dynamic that where the marketer, the buyer, the real estate investor is kind of positioning themselves up here. If you're watching the video, like they have the power, and then the seller is sort of positioned as like, hey, it looks like your building is 40% vacant. Looks like you haven't mowed the grass in about 18 months. It looks like you're going to need a new roof or a paint job. That's why I'm contacting you. So the dynamic is sort of off. It's got this sort of lion, antelope kind of a dynamic,
predator prey sort of thing.
Totally. Yeah. Does that sound like it's the kind of thing that fosters an open dialogue? And no, definitely not. I like the dynamic to be nice and safe. So here's what we do. We reach out to people who own properties in the areas we want to buy them, of the type of property we want, right? So I might reach out to everybody who owns like a 5 to 20 unit building, for instance, in these zip codes in my town, who's owned it for, let's say, like 10 years or more. Because I definitely want somebody who's got a lot of equity, possibly even owns the property free and clear. That's going to sort of clearly set us up for a seller financing type of conversation. But one of the most important things is in the letter, we try to very clearly establish what I call peer positioning. It's like, hey, I'm just like you. Hi, I'm Jeff. My wife, Jessica, and I, we're fellow landlords here in town. We saw you have this property. She and I are actively looking to buy another building that we could manage ourselves and do the leasing and management and take good care of. If you ever consider selling that property, would you give us a call? It'd be so nice to chat with you about it face to face. If now's not the right time, no problem. We're not in a rush. Just, hold on to the letter. We hope to hear from you sometime. So it's this dead simple letter, but it's also very strategic because that tells the seller like, oh, these people are like me. They're not professionals who are going to, smoke me in some negotiation because they have an expertise level that dwarfs mine. They're not sharks. They're nothing like that. It's just like, this is just a regular person sending a letter to a regular person. It's a very safe, open conversation. And it tends to make people call because they simply feel safe doing so. It's really cool. Two really neat things happen. One is, and this, I mean, universally with everybody I work with, myself a million times, somebody will call you back from a letter and they'll say, gosh, you know what? I've gotten like a lot of letters over the years about my property or my properties. Mm-hmm. I've never called anybody back before, but something just felt a little different about your letter. And it's like, yeah, it's just this peer positioning thing. And then the second thing that's really, really cool and always kind of encouraging and exciting is you'll get a call from somebody who you sent the letter to, like, it could be like 3 months ago, 9 months, 18 months. And they said, yeah, you know, I got your letter and it's just at the time, it wasn't the right time when I got it, but I could tell you were a real person. I just hung on to it, stuck it in a file, you know, put it up on my fridge, whatever. And now the time is right. And we are thinking about selling. And so I thought I'd give you a call back. Mm-hmm. So because this type of like marketing that's just sincere from one regular person to another, doesn't look like a business marketing at all. It has like what I would call like a residual value. It's worth saving, right? It's worth saving.
How are you deciding on who, like, talk to me about your buy box a little bit. Like, how are you deciding what leads to go after? And then I want to circle back around on the peer positioning thing in a second, but like, totally, yeah. How are you, and at what volume, I guess, too, are you marketing?
Yeah, I would say a typical month for us is probably, there have been times when it's been lower and times when it's been higher, but a typical month for us is maybe sending like 800 letters, something like that at the moment. That's
not very many. Like for listeners that maybe haven't done this, and Jeff, I hope you don't mind me saying so. That's like, you know, it sounds to me like you're pretty targeted. You're pretty pinpointed in what you're doing, because if you're blanketing Portland with We Buy Houses postcards, like that's more in the tens of thousands, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is definitely much more targeted than that. Yeah. So we have probably about that kind of volume, but in terms of our buy box, I'm very, very particular about location. I'm not one of the people who does or advocates for, hey, and this is just me. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who are not on the same page with this comment. So I'll just make that disclaimer first, but I'm not the kind of person that's like, oh, I own stuff 7 states over that I've never seen before. That's just not me and how I operate.
Yeah.
So, my buy box is very, geographically oriented. Even within my town, there's sort of sectors of town that I would, you know, kind of market to, and then others that I wouldn't. Second thing is, this applies more for single family, but absentees only. I'm not, you know, but for multifamily, people who have owned property for at least 10 years or so, right? Chances of somebody who bought it last year wanting to sell right now, unless they're a professional investor who just, you know, value added the property, which is not what I want to buy. I want to buy something I can add value to myself. But aside from those things,
I'll just add to that real quick, Jeff, is just right now. It's just a unique time because there's going to be some, you know, a fair number of distressed situations that people got into 2-3 years ago, you know, with adjustable rate loans or short-term bridge loans, and they just got to get out. So
yeah,
that's just to add a little caveat to that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think, and that actually starts to talk about like, well, what is seller financing? How is it? How does it relate to creative financing? Are those two things just synonymous? But we can get back there. But to me, actually,
that's a good point. Thinking out loud with in a multifamily, when you're working on a seller finance from a seller finance structure, yes, it makes a lot more sense to go after the long-term ownership, because the chances of them having big time equity in the property are very high. So
yeah, gotcha. Absolutely.
I'm following that. Yep.
So to me, the most important criteria, and I don't know this necessarily until I get a call from somebody, but to me, the single most important criteria is not about the property. It's about the person. It's about the seller. Seller financing is actually much more about the people than it is about the property in most cases. And so what I'm looking for when somebody calls me is I'm trying to sort of size up what I would just simply refer to as like, how reasonable are they? And here's what I mean by reasonable, because it might not be totally obvious. If somebody, you know, if your seller called you and said, I want 2.5 million for this property, and you're thinking it's worth about half that one, the one you just described that you bought, most people might say, oh, that seller is unreasonable. That's not my definition of unreasonable, though. My definition of unreasonable is somebody who's not willing to interact with me and engage with me in the manner that I want to. The seller who just calls me and says, you've got 30 minutes, send me a text with a number. Like, no, thanks. That's unreasonable to me, because that's not the type of interaction I want to have. The type of interaction I want to have ideally is like, I'm going to end up sitting in their living room in the next couple of days. We're going to have a real conversation. They're going to offer me a cup of coffee that they made themselves. I'm going to ask if they want me to take off my shoes as I walk into their house, and we're going to have a real conversation between two people. The unreasonable seller to me is the one who is not willing to sort of play the game in the way that I would want to play the game. So you can't identify that in terms of a buy box from a set of list criteria. But as those people get back to me, that's actually the main filter I'm looking for. Is this a person I can engage in the way that I want to?
Yeah. Okay. So rapport, basically just gauging for, like you said, are they reasonable? Are they a reasonable person that's going to deal with you on a reasonable business level? Because at the end of the day, these transactions are business. They don't always feel that way. They especially in the single family space can feel very personal sometimes. But okay, so you get a good person, a good lead that you feel great about working with. Talk a little bit about how you set things up with them, or what you propose, or how you work with them.
Yeah. So rapport is a huge part of it. And so when they first call, the idea for me is we have to start to establish some rapport, but then I want to transition towards an in-person meeting, face to face, ideally at their own home would be the best possible place for me. And here's why. I always want to be upgrading the type of communication channel that I'm working in, right? If you think about like the lowest form of communication in terms of like actually deeply communicating with somebody might be like text. And then a little step up from that might be email. And then a little step up from that is phone. And then another step up would be meeting them at Starbucks. But at the top would be meeting them in their own environment. And so why is that so important? Because that's where all the clues are. My job is to figure out who I am working with here so that I can understand their worldview. And ultimately I can put a proposition in front of them, framed in a way that aligns with how they think and see the world, right? You could be talking to the exact same seller. Picture two versions of the exact same seller who own the exact same property. And one says to you, Tate, I got to sell this thing because we all know the world is going to hell in a handbasket and the economy is falling apart. Right. And the other person, the exact same property, everything else about them, they're saying, well, as you know, good deals and good locations are hard to come by. And this is a pretty desirable property. You could be talking to the exact same person with that difference in worldview right there changes everything about how we're going to negotiate with them, because they just see things through very different lenses, even though the situation is exactly the same. So we're going to get face to face with them if we possibly can at all. And do some people resist that? Sure. Some do, but in many cases, they really don't, maybe as much as one might expect. And so what I like to say is that we have to, I've got a couple of little things I like to say here. One is we have to put the relationship in contract before we can put the deal in contract, meaning we have to establish that I like you and you like me before an agreement on terms around a deal is ever going to happen. And so I like to actually encourage people to slow down and like stop worrying so much about the property right off the bat. When somebody calls you back from a letter, when you go to meet their house, you go to meet them at their house, everybody just wants to launch and you're like, okay, great. How old is the roof? When were these HVAC systems replaced? Do you have a schedule of this? Like, we actually want to kind of put the brakes on that, play a little game of how long can you delay talking about the property in favor of talking about things like the soccer scarves that are on their wall, the rapport building connections between them, the various things that you see as a result of the clues that are coming from their environment. Because now we're establishing that rapport, we're building that relationship, we're helping them see like we are like them, and we're starting to understand much better who they are too. Ultimately, as this conversation progresses, another one of the things I just talk about like all the time in my own business, but then the people I get to work with too, is we have to solve the person before we can solve the deal. Like we'll never know the best possible optimized offer basically, or proposal, we'll come back to that in a second, for the actual property itself. We'll never know what the best possible deal is until we understand the seller as well as we possibly can. One of the huge examples of this, and I'll just say this and I'll be quiet. I don't want to go on for too long, but
this is great.
Capital gains tax. There's three words that are very big in the world of everybody listening to this podcast, right? Any seller you're talking to, whether they're represented by an agent or whatever, like most of them, that's going to be an issue for them. If we don't necessarily have the opportunity to understand how they perceive their own capital gains tax situation, we're never going to really understand what the best seller financing options are. And we could end up like firing off some offer that completely misses like the most amazing opportunity to get the best seller financing terms if we had only understood what their thoughts on their own capital gains tax situation are. And again, two sellers, you have the exact same property, and one says, well, capital gains tax, I'm only paying it because we've done well. It's part of the American way. And the other person says, are you kidding me? You see who's in the White House over there? I'm not shipping them all my money so that they can run their agenda that I don't agree with. If we don't understand those key insights, we'll never be able to craft a proposal that will actually be as good as it possibly could be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so key. You got to know the business, right? You got to know what you're doing. You got to know the options. You got to know what you can propose and what's going to work best for each individual, because each individual situation is different and it's complex. There's nuances. And I like to think that my degree in psychology is helpful in all of this too, Jeff. Honestly,
I imagine it really is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like there's times that you're really like, most of the time when you're in conversation with people, and that's what this business is. It's just all conversations, right? Like legit, like you are, you're just constantly creating the meaning and conversing and sharing. And so, so awesome. You mentioned you had a coach, Jeff. I want to ask you about that for a second, because I'm just a huge believer in coaching and especially in formal mentorship, paid coaching, either one-on-one or coaching masterminds. I actually have both. I facilitate both. So talk to me a little bit about your coach and what a contribution he's been for you.
It would be hard for me to capture it all accurately. His name is Greg Pinio. I met him because he knew a bunch of other sort of my peers in the Portland area had already worked with him. And so once I was introduced to him and I finally sort of opened my mind and my heart, I guess, to the idea that I needed some help, everything changed. It was amazing how everything changed, because he was the person who, remember I described before, I got these, like I bounced off this one end of the spectrum. It was like, my gosh, that feels sleazy. I can see how it works, but it feels sleazy. No, thanks. This other one that's like, it feels fine, but it doesn't seem like it's going to work very well. He's the one who really showed me the third different option, which is exactly what I do now. As a coach, like people ask me now, like, Jeff, why do you coach other people now? And I say, because I am the product of a great coach, and I see exactly what that kind of relationship can mean. And then secondly, this just approach that I've learned from him, and then I try to, put my own like little touch on whenever I can. It's just not. It's more people need to know about it. I can't believe it's as uncommonly known, I guess, as it is. And so I think we need to progress this message, but I see exactly how powerful it is to have that. I've often said that it's really, it's hard for somebody who hasn't been through it, I guess, yet to experience this. But sometimes you need somebody who believes in you more than you believe in yourself. Somebody who can actually see you more clearly than you see yourself. And help you, hone your greatest talent, like your greatest natural talents, and apply them in the context of real estate investing, real estate entrepreneurship. And that's really, really invaluable. So yeah, I've worked with him every month for, 7 or 8 years.
Wow. That's a long coaching relationship.
It is.
That's
absolutely
outstanding. Really, really cool. And what a cool testament great. I mean, that's sometimes these relationships are as important as like our parents or our, our siblings or best friends or what. I mean, the amount of influence that a coach can have in your world and in different parts of your life or every part of your life is just so immense. And I love what you said about you being a coach because you are the product of a good coach. And that's how I got started in the multifamily space, was coaching mastermind with the big kahuna, Corey Peterson. Many of you guys have heard that story. And, it's why I do what I do with my mastermind and why I'm helping so many people get off the ground in this business and get portfolios started and get businesses started. So, that's super fun. Jeff, I'm just curious, what's your juice in this for, like, what's the juiciest part of this for you?
I want to make sure I understand what you mean by juice of real estate investing or
Yeah. Like the whole thing, between the coaching, the podcast, the actual deal making, the personal development work, like really all the aspects of this. Cause I see this venture that we're in, and we're not exactly in the same space. You are in the commercial multifamily space, but we're in a little different asset classes, generally speaking, but nonetheless, we're doing a lot of the same sorts of things and having important conversations with people about big sums of money that's often life savings and whatnot. Like, so I'm just kind of curious, like, another way of asking this question you hear a lot of people ask is, what's your what's your why? Like, what's the why behind what you do, how you do this? And so I just like the juice, right? Like, we squeeze this thing to get the juice out of it. So like, totally.
I got you now.
Yeah.
So, for several years, separately, I was in a program called Strategic Coach. This is an entrepreneur coaching program, not specific to real estate whatsoever. Yeah. People all over North America and all over the country, all over the world, actually. And one of the concepts that they teach in there is something called unique ability. And unique ability is this interesting, intersection of the thing that you are best at that creates the most value for others, the thing that you find endlessly fascinating and never want to stop growing in, the thing that gives you energy instead of drains energy. Yeah. And all of this is sort of confluence of all these things. And so my juice is what I learned about myself from going through that process. And essentially what I learned is that the thing that gets me going the most, and whether like I'm doing this to or for myself, whether I'm helping a podcast listener, whether I'm helping a seller, is I love to help people see the core essence of a situation from a different perspective. So they like walk around the situation and see the same situation, but from a different angle, and walk them around that situation so that when they see it from that other angle, it unlocks something in them that it sort of unleashes their ability to kind of move forward or grow. So I've always, on a personal level, I think friends come to me when they feel kind of, their mind is jammed up on some topic, and I can help them unpack it, walk around it, and see it from a different angle. Mm-hmm. I would say, like, as a evangelist, so to speak, of a different approach to real estate entrepreneurship, that's kind of what I'm hoping to do. Is it's kind of like creating light bulb moments for people by just helping them see something from a different perspective. Yeah. And so to me, like, that's probably where the most rewarding part of the juice comes from. But it also, what's really cool is it happens with sellers, and actually happens with sellers a lot in the context of seller financing too, because they don't necessarily realize that there's another way to look at their own situation. And once they see that, they're like, oh my gosh, that sort of blows my mind. So I'd say that's the juice for me, is that's the thing that I could do all the time and not get ever have an energy drain from. In fact, I would just gain energies from more of those types of interactions.
Yeah, and that says it all right there. When you're doing that, like when you are doing for quote unquote work or employment or whatever, compensation, when you're doing something that really lights you up and doing something that you love, that gives you energy, right? That's when that whole adage about you're never going to work another day in your life if you do something that you love comes in, because if it's feeding you, right? If it's giving you energy and it's lighting you up and it's pulling you out of bed in the morning, and it's giving you more to give to other people, then that's it, man. That's your zone, dude. And congratulations on finding that and being able to lock into that. And because it's, that the world needs more people like you, Jeff, that are intentional about bringing other people along. And one of the things that you mentioned just a couple minutes ago that I just want to highlight is that you help people see options essentially for themselves that they didn't otherwise would otherwise not have seen. Right.
Totally. Yeah,
and
exactly.
That to me is like, man, that's like one of the biggest gifts you can ever give anybody, especially if you're in a kind of a counseling or even a therapist role or a coaching role or, just a less formal, like friendship role, family, spouse, all that stuff. Like when you can light people up like that and give them a vision or help them get their own vision, really where the juice really is, I think, for what's possible for them that they may not have been able to see before. Dude, that is money. It's just magical to me. And I'm with you there, man. Like that gives me the same feeling. Like, I'm totally with you.
Totally.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if there's one sentence that will just make my day every time is if somebody goes, whoa, I have never thought about it that way before. Like that to me, that's the key phrase right there. I'm like, yes, like, all right, I'm hanging it up for today. I achieved my mission.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So if listeners want to learn more about specific techniques that you teach, I know you've got a free training course, Seller Finance 101 training course. Listeners, you can find that at sellerfinancing-101.com. Again, sellerfinancing-101.com. Tell us a little bit about that, Jeff, about your course.
Yeah. So, when I work with people in a coaching relationship, it's sort of like we have to have a bit of a common language. And we can't have a very sophisticated conversation unless there's a common language that we can speak. And I thought, I want to have these like sophisticated conversations with more people. Like, okay, let me just create something that gives everybody the common language and framework and just sort of clarify some important initial concepts. And then even some like somewhat more like intermediate concepts as well, but just it tees them up to be able to have a more advanced conversation about seller financing, because that's where I really geek out on that. And I would love to, I just think there's some very unique, unexpected things that you can do with seller financing that changes the game entirely. When you buy a property with seller financing, you're buying two things. You're buying a property and you're buying a financing package, and they come together, but they don't have to stay together forever. And when you start to look at them individually, here's the property and all its attributes and pros and cons. And then here's the financing package and its attributes and pros and cons, but you see them as two separate assets, which I know it's weird to consider a loan as an asset. But when you start to look at it for its own attributes, then you can start to do some pretty powerful things. And that leads into what we call supercharged seller financing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you thumbnail supercharged seller financing for us just real briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So supercharged seller financing is basically a series of a few small but massive, small in terms of words, but massive in terms of their symbolism and their power. Things that you can negotiate into your seller financing loans that make them more valuable, way more valuable, to the point. And I'll get back to like what those things are in a second. But I often buy properties that I don't even want just for the seller financing I get. And somebody might say, great, so you bought kind of a mediocre property because you got great terms. But actually what I'm saying is I would buy a property that I didn't even want to get the amazing seller financing terms I negotiated. I would then get rid of the property and just keep the financing terms. that I negotiated.
Right.
And that's a big part of what supercharged seller financing does.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows us to, it gives us a lot of increased flexibilities within our promissory note. Like you just bought, at the beginning of the episode here, you were talking about the deal you just bought, and you got some sounds like some partial seller financing in there, right?
Yep.
So if there were certain things that were negotiated in that promissory note and in that loan agreement with that seller, it's possible that small block of seller financing could be just as valuable to you. It could be just as much of a win to you as actually the whole property you might have bought yourself.
Right. Yep.
So one of the main elements of it is what we call a substitution of security clause. So if I buy a property with seller financing, I'm buying two things, right? I'm buying the property and I'm buying the financing. They come together, but with a substitution of security clause, they don't have to stay together forever.
Mm-hmm.
A substitution of security clause gives me the ability to go back to the seller and say, I'm going to provide you with a different piece of collateral for this loan than what we started with. Initially, the loan was secured by the property I just bought from you.
Mm-hmm.
But we, in our agreement, we have pre-decided that I have the ability to provide you with different or upgraded collateral if I want to, a different piece of real property for that loan. Now that sounds really simple in premise, but it's when you start to think about how you could apply that,
Mm-hmm.
that's really, really powerful. In your case, if you wouldn't mind, like how much is the seller financing component of that deal you just did?
It was $600,000.
Okay.
$1.4 million purchase. And we did a bridge loan with a big CapEx budget. So we got the purchase and a $1.5 million CapEx budget in the loan. So that was a big chunk of the down payment of the loan, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So you're, if I'm remembering the purchase price, right? Your bank loan is what, around 700,000, something like that?
No, the bank loan is, no, it's because it included the CapEx. So it's quite a bit more than that.
Okay. So regardless, let's say you execute your business plan here and you improve the NOI of the property, right? Now it's worth a lot more and you go to refinance that property. A lot of people would feel like that what they're going to do, sort of obviously, is they're going to pay off both the bank loan and the seller financing loan as part of this cash out or just part of this refinance, whether it's cash out or not. But with a substitution of security clause, in advance of that, you might look at that and you might say, okay, do I have $600,000 of equity in any of my other properties? Maybe you have another building over here, another community that's got, that's got some equity in second position. And you said, okay, we have equity and we have cash flow in this other building. I'm going to take this loan and I'm going to substitute the collateral that secures this seller financing loan. It's not property A anymore that we just did our business plan on. It's actually property B that I've owned for the last 5 years. So that seller is going, or they're beneficiary of a promissory note. They're going to release their deed of trust on the property that you just bought in favor of recording a new deed of trust on the property you've already had for 5 years over here. And now they're secured in second position on this property you already have. Now you go to refinance property A, the one that you just added all the value to, and there's $600,000 that you don't have to pay off. So if you were to go get a nice new big loan, you're not only going to take out the bank loan that you bought the property with, there's also going to be no seller financing loan that you're going to have to pay off. And that's going to put a lot of cash in your pocket. That's just kind of one sort of simple example.
Yeah.
But what we tend to be doing as real estate investors all the time is we're always out buying, or we're out looking for great product, great properties that we can buy that fit our buy box criteria, we can add a lot of value to. And we're also always shopping for lots of money. And what we don't often realize is that with the right strategy, the best money that we can ever get is actually from sellers. So if we put more energy into buying like a package deal, with, like, in other words, a property with seller financing and negotiating it with supercharged seller financing, we're getting two things for one there, and that we can separate them and they can be valuable in and of themselves. So that's why I say, like, I might buy a property just for the financing and then resell the property, but keep the financing. So anyway.
Right. Yeah. And, listeners, like, this is something to keep in mind with any property at any time, whether it's listed by a broker, whether it's 250 units, like there's almost always an option for creative financing, seller carryback, and lots of different ways to construct it, different ways to collateralize, secure it. So there's a reason it's called creative financing. It is definitely creative, and it's something you got to learn the language of, and Jeff's got you all set up with his free course on that. So, and then you'll definitely, again, want to check out Jeff's, his podcast called, again, help me out with that. Racking
Up Rentals.
Up Rentals. So guys, check that out on your favorite Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Play, wherever you listen to podcasts. Jeff, this has been amazing. Any kind of like, I told you I wasn't going to put you on the spot with any hard questions, but here's maybe just a little bit of a hard one. Any kind of final thoughts, words of wisdom, I guess, for, in your case, you've been at this for a while now. I mean, you've been self-employed for 20 years. You started buying properties 20 years ago. If you could go back to, let's say, that first year when you bought that triplex, how would you coach yourself? What would you tell yourself at that point?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I feel like the thing that I would want to instill in myself then, that I want to try to be a evangelist for now, this is a philosophical thought, and I can make it more specific, but every single one of us, every person listening to here is obviously a unique person, right? We all have our own unique talents and gifts and strengths. Yet, in my experience, we don't often think a whole lot about cultivating a strategy for real estate investing that really captures those unique gifts. Instead, we kind of feel like this is my take. We get interested in real estate, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is exciting, but it's a little complicated. It's high stakes. Let me learn the recipe and the formula for how real estate investing works. And then so we consider it to be, the formula is what the formula is. And I have to conform myself to fit that recipe and that formula, because this is how success works. So I have to morph myself into being that. But the other way to look at things is to say, what am I actually really good at? What are my talents and gifts and strengths? And how could they be applied in the context of trying to do what I'm trying to do? And that's going to be a different answer for lots of people. But
right,
I strongly believe there's a lot of people who are kind of like me, who are thoughtful or aspire to be thoughtful, who want to interact with people on a genuine sort of level, who don't feel good about things being too transactional. And I think one of the real questions is, if that's a superpower, which it absolutely is, how do we make sure that our real estate investing strategy is not leaving that superpower just sitting on the bench?
Yes.
It's like, yes. I guess a simpler way to say this would be, I really wish strengths-based investing was more of a thing, frankly. Okay. I wish that was a concept that was more common in our space here. Because once we really dial into that, I think, and start to adapt kind of what we do, stop thinking of it so much as a formula that has to be followed, but rather as, how do I take some principles, but apply them really in the context of who I am uniquely, and not be afraid to do that. That's when I think great things can happen.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Right on the money. Great place to leave it. Jeff, thank you so much. This has been just a fascinating conversation. Appreciate everything that you brought to it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate the conversation and share this perspective with you.
Yeah. So listeners, look up Jeff Stevens. Find out. And I'm guessing you're on some of the social medias as well, Jeff.
I am. Yeah. I tend to spend way too much time on Facebook specifically. Yeah. So I'm easy to find there.
Okay. There you go. So listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of the Apartment Gurus, and we will see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.
This has been the Apartment Gurus with Tate Siemer. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. To contact Tate, go to www.investwithgreenlight.com for access to his investor portal and Calendly link. He loves to hear from you and thanks you for being a valued listener. Just a reminder that you are the guru. See you on the next episode of the Apartment Gurus.